In this video, we are going to do a beat from scratch on the Elektron Syntakt. We're going to go through how to build some sounds, how to do some sound design, how the Elektron sequencer works, how the effects block works, building sounds for performance, how to build in some cool little things for performance, and then at the end, we'll actually jam out with what we have and do a little performance of the track that we've built. And if you enjoy this video, I'd appreciate if you'd give it a like and then drop a comment down below. It helps the algorithm push it out to a few more people. So hopefully some people can see this and get something out of it as well. And if you'd like to support the channel, there's going to be some links down below to my Patreon as well as some affiliate links. So if you'd like to purchase any gear, a small portion of that does come back to help support the channel, and it doesn't cost you anything at all extra. If you do decide you want to join the Patreon, you get some neat things like recordings of all of the live jams that I do on here that are downloadable, future sample packs and sound banks, and guest lists to shows when available, and all sorts of fun stuff. Plus you get access to our Discord channel, which we're just building up right now, and it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of cool people on there, so we'd love to see you over there as well. Here we go with a beat from scratch with the Elektron Syntakt. All right, so here we go. We have one of the initialized patterns here. So that's how the patterns load up. Do a couple quick things. Pattern per track, so that way each one of the tracks can be a different length. So if we want to do anything that's any kind of a polymeter or anything like that, we can do that later on. And let's jump right in. So I usually start with a kick drum. So let's load up, actually kind of like the hard one. So we'll just load that up the way it is here. Tighten it up just a little bit, add a little more transient. All right, kind of like that one there. Let's give it a little overdrive. Shorten that up just a little bit with the amp. So we can start off with just sequence a little bit of a 4 on the floor kick. So next I like to go for a bass line. We'll do another one of the analog engines here. Let's take that down to the dual VCO. With this dual VCO, we've got a choice of different waveforms over here. It's obviously dual VCO, so it means that there's two waveforms, and we can just kind of flip through those, see if there's any combination that sounds good. Right now we've got this kind of saw-ish wave. A couple of sines with some ring modulation. That's what the little R means here. So it's kind of a sort of a saw on the top with a sine on the bottom with some ring modulation. And then you've got balance here between the two. And then you've got separate decays for each one, which is pretty cool too. Overdrive this a little bit more. Then you can detune them against each other if you choose. And then this bend makes it so that it's kind of like an attack on it, so it can either come from high to low or low to high into the notes you hear. Or all right. So now what I like to do with bass lines is I like to just sequence in a few kind of random steps just to kind of get a pattern going, get some sort of a groove going. I usually avoid the 1, 5, 9, and 13. So rather than having to duck the bass out of the way, I'll avoid that at least from the start. If I feel like it needs to have one of those hits in there, then I'll put it in there. But in the meantime, I'll just add in some random trigs here and we'll go from there. Then once you get something in that's kind of a little bit of a rhythm, you can then add some additional pages. What it does when you start with a 16-step sequence and then you add additional pages, it'll duplicate it onto those other pages. So now we've got page 1 and page 2 that both look the same. But if we want to change some things up and do something simpler on page 1 and then go to page 2 and add in a little bit of a fill or something, we can do that. So once I get a pattern in that I like and I get the sound a little bit dialed in like I like, then I can go in and I can actually modify each one of these steps as I want. So go back to page 1 here and let's change up. And then something that's great about the sequencers and all of the Elektron devices is that you can parameter lock basically anything in here to individual steps. So let's say on these 2 steps where I wanted to have that note go up just a little bit, I can go into the filter, and if I hold that down, I can actually add more amp envelope just to that step, for example. And then I can add it into a couple of others if I want. And if we don't like that we add it in, you just hold it down and press on that controller and it brings it back to its normal value. So that's just a way to parameter lock that particular thing that you wanted to lock on there. But then if you wanted to, you can go in, like for example, to the amp page, and let's say on this last step here, we wanted to add some delay. So we can just hold that in, open up the delay, and maybe open up the reverb as well. Send a bunch of that there, and that will only happen on this step. So if you listen. just on that last step of the pattern, we added delay, added some reverb, opened up the filter envelope, and then the amp envelope as well. So you can see, open up the amp there, added delay, reverb, up the volume just a little bit on that one so it'll impact just a bit more, and you can hear it again from the start. And you hear how that rings out over the others, so that effect will still go even as the next step plays. They won't choke each other or anything like that, which is really cool. You can do that all over the place on different things and at different times. You can even set different things to happen with different probability, which we'll go into in just a little bit here. But this is a good way to kind of get a little bit of movement with the bass. Something else that we can do is every single track has 2 LFOs. So if we go into the LFO page on this, we can choose a destination. Like, for example, let's go to the filter resonance. We'll just add a little bit here, and with this sine wave type LFO, let's hear what it sounds like. Change that up and go for something a little different. Let's do the sustain on the amp and see what that sounds like. Not quite getting the movement that I'm looking for here, so let's look for something else here. Maybe pan, that'd be a good one. So that way it kind of pans back and forth while it's going. And then we can go to the second LFO. And let's do the filter frequency on this one. Just a little. So when we do something like that, for example, with the filter frequency, that's going to change it for the bass notes, the ones that aren't modified using a parameter lock. But within the parameter locks, if we go back into the filter, the parameter lock still has those things locked in. If it's not parameter locked, it will be affected by whatever we're doing there. But if it is parameter locked, it'll the parameter lock will override kind of the master thing that you're doing there. Now that we've got the kick and bass, let's go to our next track. Let's do hi-hat. So we've got these kind of start off as hats, and it's a good place for them to be for me because they're one above the other. So I usually do a closed hat on 12 and an open hat on 4. So that way they're right next to each other, makes it easier for performance a little bit later on. So let's go into this one here. We'll just add some offbeat hats, and then we will dial this in just a little bit. I'm going to open up the decay, and then I'm going to actually clean it up with the amp in a little bit here. Go into the amp envelope. A little bit of reverb. All right, let's try that sound. Let's go on to the close tab before we get too far along with this one. And this is on the dedicated cymbal engine down here. So these are all the analog tracks, 9 through 12. This is an analog cymbal engine. You can adjust the type of hit if you want. The decay of the hit. Try that. Something else that's really cool with this, because you've got 2 LFOs per channel, you can go in and use one LFO just to kind of humanize your hi-hats. So if we go into random and then you choose the destination, you can choose any one of the parameters within the synth engine. So tune, tail decay, cymbal type, hit decay. All of those are different ways that you could kind of vary things up just a little bit. But then you can do things like attack time, decay time, all of that kind of stuff. So it gives you a lot of different options of ways to do it. So what we're going to do is the hit decay a little bit, or actually the hit type, because that's kind of actually the humanizing of how you would hit the cymbal. The cymbal itself would still react similarly, but it's going to change up the way that that hit is done on each one of those. So I will off everything except that, so we can hear what this does. So you can see what it's doing is it's using that random waveform to give kind of a random amount of hit with each time, because as a human drummer is hitting a hi-hat or hitting any other one of the drums, they're going to hit it slightly different every single time that they hit it. So this gives you that kind of humanization throughout the whole hi-hat. Something else that's kind of cool with the Syntakt, the D-Tact, and the D-Tone is that if you hit function in LFO, it takes you to a mixer page. So you've got your first 8 tracks on the first page. Then on the second page, you've got all of your analog tracks down below. So you can actually, while you're playing, you can mix those and kind of get the levels exactly where you want them to go, rather than having to go track to track to track to track and adjust those all along the way. Now, something else that's cool with the Syntakt is that you have the effects block. So if you hit function and effects, this analog effects block, no matter whether it's a digital engine or an analog engine, it drives through an analog overdrive and an analog filter. And on this page is where you select which of the different tracks that you'd like to send there. So let's say we wanted to send our bass and our open hi-hat. We added the others in. Now what we can do is if you hit track and effects, then this will take you over to the functions over here, then become the functions for the effects track. So if we were going to go, let's say, to the synth page, that gives us the overdrive. So it allows us to drive those things. And if you remember, we only had the open hi-hat and the bass going through that, so they were the only things being overdriven. You know, we could take those off and just overdrive the kick, for example. Something else that's really cool that you can do with this as well is you can sequence a ducking effect. So instead of having a sidechain effect, you can actually duck things out of the way, which is really interesting. So if you were to go in and, let's say, everything but the kick, we were to put on here, then when you go to track and effects and you go to the amp, you've got this negative amp envelope, and you can actually shorten this way up here, adjust the depth of it, and that gives you a duck wherever you sequence on this track, right? So if we were to go into this effects track and we were to sequence just the 1, 5, 9, and 13, it will duck everything that's run through it, which is everything except the kick in this case. So it would duck everything out of the way of the kick. If we take the kick out, you'll still hear it. Now what's cool about this is you can adjust your attack, your hold time, and your decay time, and the depth, and that basically mimics what you would have in a compressor with your attack, your rate, your release, and your the amount of compression that you have. So you can mimic the ducking of a compressor, but you're not just doing it based off of something that's triggering it. You can actually sequence it on that track. You can sequence the ducking effect that you may want to do. And you can adjust the depth, and that adjusts basically how much you're doing. So if we very little, and you can actually adjust the decay time way back and increase the hold time, and it ends up with doing like a gate effect. So anyway, it's really handy because you can, like I said, you can sequence that, or so if you wanted to do it just as something that ducked, you can do it like that. Or if you want, you can sequence it in some really creative ways. So if we wanted to duck things on, random notes throughout here, we could do that as well. To the 4 on the floor. Something else that's really cool as well is when you're assigning what you want to go through the effects block, you can actually assign the delay and the reverb as well as an external input. So if you've got an external synth running through this, you can drive that synth through this analog effects block as well. So you've got that amp envelope, you've got an analog filter, you've got the overdrive. So it's actually pretty handy. So for example, if you were to take this and you were to drive the reverb through this this ducking effect as well, and then we were to go back and let's just take our bass here. If we were to dump a whole bunch of reverb onto this, You notice that it ducks the reverb as well, or you can choose to have it not duck the reverb. So you go back into your effects and you take the reverb off, and then it would duck just the bass sound, but not the reverb coming off of it. And then we add the reverb back into the insert for the effects block. You can get really creative with this effects block, deciding what you want to send through it and how you want it to work. And again, it has analog overdrive, it has the analog filter, and then it has that amp envelope that you can adjust. All of that is sequenceable. It has its own effects track so that you can parameter lock things in that just like you can with the other steps. You can basically sequence your analog effects with their own sequencer track, and you can mix this up when you're doing a performance. You can actually use these to mute and unmute the send through the effects block as well. So you can decide at different times that you want to send it through things. So if you left that ducking effect as a main part of the insert effect, and you just wanted to do it at certain parts during the track, you can just open up this, like I said, function and effects, and that opens this up, and you can decide whichever ones you want to send to it, and then you can take them all back off there again. So let's get back to our beat here. Need all that reverb. All right, so let's open up a couple of these other tracks here. So let's do a clap just to show you something that I like to do when I sequence the claps in here. So obviously the basic clap would be on 5 and 13. But one of the cool things that you have within these Elektron boxes is when you don't push function before you hit this page button, the page button becomes a fill. So anytime you push this, anything that's given the trigger condition of fill will play. And so it's really cool because you can do things, for example, like you could sequence all these different hits here, and if you hold them down, go to trig and then condition, you can set them all to fill. Another thing that's cool here is you can hold these 4 down and hit copy, and then you just have to hold the first of the 4 and hit paste, and it will paste them all in. Hit it here and paste, and hit it here and paste. So now there is a clap on every single step of this 16 steps. The 5 and the 13 are set to happen all the time, 100% of the time, whereas all of the others are set to only happen when I press this button down during play. So if you listen, and then if I want to do a clap roll or a snare roll, I can do the same thing with snares. So it's really handy when you're programming this in, if you're programming it in to perform, or if you're planning on performing it into your DAW using Overbridge, and that's the way that you want to record this into your DAW, for example, to work on later. You can build these fills in and you can use them whenever you want. Now there's other trigger conditions. If you go to the trig page, this condition section of the trig page, you can touch something, and right now it's set for fill, but you can set it for not fill. So anytime you're not pressing this, that will play, but if you press it, it will not play, which is handy as well. So sometimes you want to do fill with your claps or your snare, and then set all of your kicks to not fill. So whenever you're holding this down, the kick will drop out and the fill will activate for the snare or the hi-hat. Then there's all sorts of other conditions. So you've got the percentage one. You can decide what percent of the time you would like that one to go. Then you've got conditional trigs. So if you've got if something happened on the trigger before, it will make that happen on that one. So we're not going to go too deep into all of the different conditions for trigs, but just to know there's a bunch of different ones. You've also got these ones which are handy. So if you want to extend kind of past your 64 steps of your sequencer, you can make things happen, only on the first time through, not on the first time through, but every other time. The first of two, second of two, first of three, second of three, third of three, all the way through like that, all the way up to 8th of 8. So it would happen only on the 8th time of every 8 times it runs through the entire pattern. So it's really cool with this that you could actually set these triggers to happen kind of whenever you would like, and it gives you a lot of opportunity to be able to add some selective randomness or some actual planned out rarity, I guess, is when you would have those different conditions happen. And again, you can do kind of the same thing with your snare drums. Same thing. We'll take out the clap now. So you set that on the 5 and 13, you've got your kind of standard snares, but then we can put these ones in here, go to trig, put it on fill, copy, paste, paste, paste. And now that simply, now we have a snare roll anytime we want. So if while you're performing, let's say you wanted to do a break and you wanted to drop out your kick drum and do a snare roll while you were going through your break, you can do that as well. So once you release it, it just goes right back into its regular kind of snare thing. You can actually do the same with both and duplicate the snare and the clap. So it's cool when if you're going to be performing, as you're building out your track, that you build it out with the idea of performance in mind. So you're building it out, adding in things like fills, adding in things like conditions and things like that will help you with your performance. So that way you can perform this pattern once you get done with it. Same thing I would say with when you're building out your sounds, like for example, this bass sound that we have here. This was built out so that it's got some kind of it's got a lot of harmonic content, so that later on when I'm performing, if I want to mess with the filters and I want to mess with the decay and things like that to kind of add some tension, I can do that later on. Something else that's really cool with the Syntakt, Digitact, Digatone, they all do this. They have a function here where you can temporarily save your pattern. So when we're cruising along, and it saves your mutes and it saves everything like that. So let's say we're cruising along and we've got this pattern that we really like. If we hit function and yes, up here it says pattern saved to temp area. So that means it's temporarily saving this state wherever you hit that. So now I can do anything I want. So if I want to add in the clap, take out this, I want to go back to my bass and I want to So what this really does is it really encourages a lot of exploration and performance. So if you build these sounds when you're first building your pattern with the idea that, oh, I'm going to be manipulating this sound, I'm going to be taking that and adding different effects to it, I'm going to be opening up that filter, I'm going to be opening up that amp envelope. So you want to make sounds that will sound interesting when you do those things, rather than just a simple basic sound. You want to make sounds that are that's gonna be dynamic as you're doing those things in your performance. Now, something else that I wanted to show real quick is the Chord engine here. So what's really interesting about this one is you've got over 30 different chords that you can decide on. So if we wanted a minor sixth, or if we wanted traditional minor chord, or you've also got unison, so you've got multiple voices of unison. Let's just do a minor chord for right now. And then these little kind of like Pac-Man ghost looking things down here, these will keep the root note of the chord the same, and it will change as you change these. It will change up the octave of the other notes. So, and sometimes it will drop them out. So what it will do is it in effect is making inversions of that particular chord, right? So right now this is on a C and it's on a minor chord, so it's going to do a C minor, right? And this would be like the normal C minor. But then as we start to go through these inversions, and then you can all go all the way back down to one single note and just the root note. Interestingly enough, if you go down to just this root note, this is basically a wavetable synth for you to program in whatever you'd like. So you can go through the wave. If you notice, it's changing the shape as it moves through the wavetable. And something that's handy about this too is that as you're going through this, if you notice just below the wave, you get a number. And so if you have a particular position in that wavetable that you really like and you want to be able to come back to it, you can just go back to that number. So let's say we like 79. That's what that one is. Now, the other thing is that wave that you go to on that root note will be the wave as you add back in the other notes in the chord. And then if you change that wave, you're changing it for all of the notes in the chord. And then you also have this punch on most of the digital tracks, and that's kind of they call it a compressor-like effect. So it basically just adds a more dynamic attack. And then you can adjust the decay. And then you have a filter envelope. And then, of course, you have your regular filter, you've got your amp and effects and all of that stuff that you can do with this. So let's just add one here with a long length. And then let's make this 64 steps long. So this will just hit on the first time through. But remember, as you duplicate those out, you duplicate out the first one. So if we take it off of the second, let's leave it on the third and take it off the fourth. But let's make the third change. Let's make this one go up to, let's say, yeah. So let's see. Let's make that one go up to an F sharp. And we'll go back and unmute the rest of our pattern here and hear how this sounds. Now we can go in and tweak that sound a bit. And again, just like we can with all of the other engines and everything, we can change this up so that if we wanted to add in, let's say on the last time through, we wanted to add, let's say we're going to add a few different triggers here, and let's make these let's hear what this sounds like. And something else that's really interesting with this too is that any one of these parameters within this Chord engine can be modulated using any of the Lfos. So where that gets really interesting is that you can modulate the what's called the Chord oscillator balance, which is actually the inversion and the type of inversion. So if you go to LFO and you go to Chord oscillator balance, we can now change up the inversion randomly or as we choose to all the way through the pattern to add uniqueness and randomness to whatever we want. So let's hear what this sounds like. So as you can see, it gives you a lot of options for happy accidents. You can just kind of let things go, let the LFO adjust things, set it to random waves and have it really do some really fun stuff. Or you can do things like when you're parameter locking, you can set specific, I want this to happen on the third time of 6 and decide exactly when you want those things. The sequencer is crazy powerful, so it allows you to do a ton of different things. And as you can hear, the sound engines in the Syntakt are also really powerful, so they're giving us a lot of different options. So let's do feels like we're missing something in the kind of higher register of the melodic side of things. So let's go to this track over here and into our synth engines, and we can choose the engine that we want. So we have toy, which is this one, tone, chord, and bits, which is kind of like a a kind of like an 8-bit. You can get some really kind of grimy sounds from that one. But I think we're going to go back to the toy sound. This one's pretty cool. Now, obviously, it sounds like a toy when you first open it up, but there's a lot of stuff that you can do with this. So you can change up the form. Again, impact, kind of like with all of the drums, it's kind of how you would hit this thing. The brightness. We're going to make kind of a plucky sound here. Add some punch. Overdrive it a little. And then we're going to tune it up a full octave. And then we can kind of tame it a little bit using the amp envelope. Soften up the attack just a little. And then add a little reverb and some delay. And then we can just kind of come up with some. I'm gonna and then we'll multiply this out again over 64 steps. Actually, we're going to take these ones off all but the end one. All right. Bring down the level there a little, and here are the sounds. So you can see how quickly and easily you can enter stuff into this, how you can modify it, how you can play around and edit things while you're performing it, and then you end up with something that you can then play into some sort of a performance as well. So we've only used 8 of the 12 tracks right now. We still have 3 digital tracks and 1 of the analog tracks that we haven't used, and we haven't driven anything through the analog effects block right now. But we already have some things that we can play with here. So let's just get started like this.
Thank